I'd like to introduce my friend Otto Kyler. Otto from Kyler Food Pro.
It's great to be with you here. We do a lot of collaborations together and we discuss a lot of things.
What is important to your customers?
It depends on the customer and the application, as you know. I think, when you and I are in a liquidating mode where liquidation is imminent, that's one thing because we're going to market. Lenders obviously want to lend as much money as they can within reason. And so, yes, the good news is they hire someone that's an expert in their field, or at least that's what we promote. In our semi-annual meetings, presentations to American Society of Appraisers, we constantly promote that an expert in the field is who you should choose to go in there. Yes, they want a loan, but they want to know the bifurcation of hard costs and soft costs. So that's really mired in the background before the research, where when you're looking at the depreciation schedule of any particular company and they go, yeah, we've got $10 million of value here. That's never true. Anywhere from 10 to 80% of that book value on the equipment side could be installation costs. So
and those are sunken costs. You're not going to recover that.
That's exactly right. So what they want, to that point, is they want to know what is the quote hard cost. They want to know what things really will have value if it has to be market value in exchange or to be removed on an individual basis, which is typically on the sell side. That's typically how an auctioneer would do it. They would offer it as an entirety. They would offer lines as a whole, but in 95% of the time, equipment sells piecemeal, and that's how they want to view it. And that's why they want an expert that buys and sells with their own money, because we witness the auction, so we know what that side is. But we also work with customers. We know what they want. We know what they'll pay for particular configuration or condition. And those are the numbers that they want. That speaks to what it is they need, what their team needs. Some people want forced liquidation value and orderly liquidation value. Fair market value is a little bit different than that because there's no time frame. So what is the most that could bring willing buyer, willing seller? They want to know that, but they want to know it objectively, I think, is my answer to your question. They want those definitions fulfilled objectively with a lot of background about how you got to where you got.
So a lender making a loan on a build out for a yogurt factory, and they could put $100 million into some of these plants that you and I have been in, and so much of that investment is a soft cost relative to the collateral value that they can get back when things go sideways, if things go sideways. If it's a new build and you're being asked to opine on the value of that equipment that's going in there, is that bank, and maybe this is a question for the lender, most of that's going to be based on the cash flow of that equipment as it's working and generating revenue to pay back that loan. And then they're measuring the risk to reward of that client over time versus what their bottom line could be if it goes sideways?
Yeah, that's above my pay grade. The part where they evaluate credit, the credit department is independent typically with my clients of the equipment management folks. We work with equipment management folks, and they're separate for a reason. And sales guys are separate as well. So sales guys sell and they want the full 10 million, but the reality is the collateral is, let's just say half of that or 5 million. And then it's going to be ultimately some percentage of that as far as collateral value. So 10 million quickly shrinks down to a much less value, but they seem to know that these days more than 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. They kind of know what's headed because the work that you and I have done and the speaking that we've done and presenting to the industry, both bankers and appraisers, their expectations are a little better than they used to be. Instead of freaking out about how 10 million turned into 4 from a collateral standpoint.
That's good. That's a good return.
Yeah.
Yeah. The soft cost to build a factory and to install a line is huge. I remember a plant that you and I looked at that was under construction when we looked at it. And I remember with fondness watching the welders put the sanitary pipe in and you and I commenting on how talented these guys are. But when you look at that, the cost to do that and the cost of those journeymen and all those people and building all that, just to flip the switch so liquid can go through that pipe is such a huge number. It's all a sunken cost.
The dairy, yes, great point. The dairy industry typically represents, we have a matrix that talks about what typical install costs are for various industries, beverage, vegetable, meat, poultry, those kinds of things, and dairy. Dairy is at the top of that list in terms of what the percentage of the total cost was installation. And that's a great example. The tubing is extraordinarily expensive. Not so much the tubing itself, but the installation, because these are certified welders. It's up in the air. It's just a lot to it. And then the controls, it's so heavily laden with automation, none of which you recover. It's super that the industry is going in that direction with automation, but you recover very, very little of that. I mean, even less than 10 cents on the dollar with automation and piping for that matter. And that really hurts when you're talking about $1 million worth of piping in a plant. It really hurts it. That plant is a really good example that you and I looked at. That plant, after we were in there, was sold.
It traded twice, didn't it?
It had a second build out. We didn't even see the finished product. We just saw barely the finished product of what we looked at the first time. There was a second build out. Then it came back on the market again, and it's currently active. That didn't go well. They struggled to get bidders, and it happened right during the pandemic, which, it's hard to know the specifics of whether that was an issue or not, but because I don't know what products they were ultimately producing because of the build out. But it was a kind of a remote location, difficult to access, and the real property wasn't that great. Well, yeah, as a percentage, dairy leads the way in soft costs without exception.
That's a great perspective, and I've never heard that before. Thanks for sharing it. I just want to tie back to what you said about automation, and I want to draw a quick analogy into sheet metal fabrication. And time again, I'll be in a factory where there's a laser, and it's got 6 towers next to it and a robot that goes and plucks sheet metal off. And, we've got this great automated system, and we spent $1 million, and, it's got a robot that brings it over. Almost inevitably adds zero value on the back end of that. So to the extent that automation helps the current user, it really doesn't translate into good collateral. Would that be a valid statement in the food processing world?
If you wanted to be succinct about it, absolutely. Automation is a wonderful thing, but it does not translate well into value, except when you're doing a fair market value installed or any kind of installed basis, where you're including that because it rolls all of that into it, both from an assemblage perspective, a mechanical assemblage where you've got a working unit. That's really what you're appraising. You're not taking individual pieces and adding them up like we typically do. You're taking the whole thing and looking at it as a going operation, not from a profitability standpoint, but what is this worth as an entirety? And the automation plays a huge role in that, because if you start to remove it, then you have to incur those costs. All new programming, all new integration.
You would think that we scripted this, but that ties right back to where you began with soft costs. And the only time that a soft cost is really recoverable is when you're discussing an in-place value, right, as you point out. And back to that same plant, that flipped as a going concern. And then you can recapture those soft costs in a going concern. The soft costs are very difficult to value from an appraiser's perspective, from my perspective. And I know that you have a very complex matrix on how you do that. And you're almost secretive and proprietary about it. I know that you share some of that with your ASA friends from time to time. But could you talk just a little bit about how you approach soft cost valuation?
I don't know that ours is unique, but it is objective and subjective. The way that you look at it, there's a lot of different approaches that are not necessarily wrong, and they're not necessarily right. I think it's based on perspective. To simplify it at its simplest form, we would say that as time goes forward, that if you take depreciation on equipment, we do a lot of forward-looking work, estimation, if you will. What's something going to be worth at the end of a lease or somewhere on the timeline? So we'll do day 1, year 1, through year 5 or year 7, which is a typical loan term. And the way that we look at depreciation on the soft cost side is that whatever the machinery depreciates, the soft costs depreciate. Now that's arguable. I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to try to calculate future install costs, because now you've got two candidates pushing for increased wages, across the board in any industry for that matter. So everybody has a living wage. Okay, well, ultimately that's going to affect soft costs. So I don't try to anticipate the future in terms of increasing costs. We try to simplify in saying, in relation to the equipment, soft cost was X percent, right? 25%, let's say, of the total project. So if we depreciate the equipment by 50%, we're going to depreciate the soft cost by 50%. From strictly a cost perspective. And I've found that there's people that will disagree with that vehemently because they want to take some more scientific approach, which you can do that. But at the end of the day, it's close because a lot of times we're looking at forward-looking values. You get another look at it in real time 3 to 5 years from now or whenever that is. So that's at the simplest form. That's how we look at it. Different things have different soft costs. A standalone machine may have very little soft costs, where a dairy complex, if you will, where you've got a lot of pumps, a lot of valves. You could have hundreds of valves where each one has a sensor. There's a wire to everyone. There's a pipe or two pipes to everyone. So you have to kind of break those things down and look at them very carefully. Not something that an appraiser that's inexperienced in a particular field, at least a rookie, shouldn't, it should fall on somebody that's a veteran in that area so that you can say, this is hard, this is soft, and how does it relate to the entirety now and in the future? I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. And it's good information because very often the accountant at the firm has a different perspective because their objective is to escalate their depreciation to move that expense line right down to zero so they can write it off right now, which creates a capital gain problem down the road in the event that they need to sell something. I mean, the accounting perspective is completely different from the valuation perspective based upon the market value, the forced liquidation value, and how that all weaves together in the form of collateral.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, for example, when somebody sends me a depreciation schedule, which we essentially demand before we even look at anything, so we know what happened, when it happened, how much they spent on each piece, we'll go down through there and say, okay, here's this depreciation schedule. They have a remaining book value just on the equipment side of, let's say, $5 million. And they want to borrow, whatever, $5 million. So it's like, okay, well, that's not what it's going to be. Let's take a look at it. So what we do is you go down through that Excel worksheet and you highlight just right out of the gate, you highlight all of the either hard costs or soft costs and you separate them and you find that percentage that we just talked about. And so the 5 million all of a sudden becomes something different from that. There is, however, a relationship, we believe, between depreciated value and fair market value installed, because you are inclusive of all of the soft costs. If you look at a company that's been in place for 10 or 12 years, a lot of things are zero on their books, but they still have some value because the way the curve works, it never gets to zero in the market. Something's always worth, we've been used equipment dealers for 75 years, something we've made in a living for an entire 5 decades on that margin where something comes down to 10% stays there.
Yeah, well, after it's fully depreciated, I believe the term of art is salvage value, but that's from an accounting perspective.
Yeah, so there is a relationship between those two things, and which is interesting. And we try to, even though people ask for orderly liquidation and fair market value, when there's a high book value, we try to look at fair market value installed anyway, based on this conversation, which is we're really kind of looking at percentages, so it's not a long, hard scientific look, just to give them to manage their expectations. Because if they have $5 million on the books and you're at 2 or 1.5, the way you and I would typically do it for collateral, if you start to move up to fair market value and then you move up again to fair market value installed, you start getting closer to the 5 and they go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. Saying, well, yeah, it is $5 million, but that's not what you asked me to do. You asked me to do this. If there's an auction and Blackbird Asset Services does the auction and promotes it in the industry as any good international marketer would do, it's 1.5. That's what you're going to get. That's the check that you'll have on your desk net. That's the way we try to. That's what our clients want to know when they're worried about a criticized asset, if you will, or a credit issue. They want to know what that check's going to look like sitting on their desk. And it might be harsh, but that's what we tell them.
Great perspective. Otto Kyler, my friend, Kyler Food Pro. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.